My name is Patterson Sims, and I'm president of the Leon Polk Smith Foundation.
My name is Dana Miller, and I'm an independent curator and art historian. One of the more compelling themes that comes out of reading his interviews is how much his childhood and his childhood surroundings impressed him. He talks often about the vast landscapes of where he grew up, of the open skies, and he uses that same language to talk about his paintings, these kind of endless fields of canvas.
His work was about being very clear about what he wanted. He was very much the product of where he'd come from, which was Oklahoma. He was born before Oklahoma was even a legal state of the Union. So he was really born in as much Indian territory. Both of his parents were half Cherokee Indian. He considered those two halves of his parents didn't make him half Cherokee. He spoke Cherokee as a younger person, and he was in a large agrarian family, and he was a field worker basically for the family. You never could have expected that it was going to lead to a life as a leading geometric abstract artist whose work would have international significance and meaning.
For him, finding the space that reminded him of the vast landscapes of his childhood was part of a larger project of finding a way to liberate the imagination through painting. You know, it was all kind of interwoven. He speaks about going to MoMA and to the Hilaire Bay collection, and that each time he saw a Picasso and a Braque and all the other modern masters that he was seeing for the first time, he felt as if he was being let out of a cage. I feel like that is such an important way to think about his project and this exhibition entitled Endless Space, because you have that sense of liberation. You have a sense of this is what he felt art could do.
There was some very good writing that occurred in the 60s about his work. Lawrence Alloway was a particularly astute individual. And then in the 70s and 80s, other people emerged. But I think his work was just harder to see in those decades. And somehow it's become easier and clearer to people at this point. Then the next kind of wave of looking at his work has come from queer theory, in some way as a way of abstraction, neutralizing what might have declared the homosexuality of the maker. I mean, it's sort of bizarre almost now because gender studies have so completely transformed a lot of thinking we have about these issues. But he was always a very out person. He had a life partner. It's as if the ways that society has transformed itself in terms of thinking about gender issues and about sexuality issues has very much come to the benefit of his work. On some level, there's an appreciation of the work from this perspective as well. There's some sense of the connectivity of certain artists in their use of geometric abstraction that in some way it deals with their gender and sexuality issues. The formal has been augmented by the psychosexual in a really interesting way. The care with which he painted, the sort of verve of his compositions, and his very lively use of color, which I think is what keeps the paintings looking and the drawings looking so fresh in our own moment. The first group of paintings he made have this strong structure built around the geometries of rectilinearity that come from neoplasticism. He then went on and realized that what Mondrian was missing was a full range of color, and also the role of the curve.
Rather than taking the rectilinear format and moving it into sculpture, as many of his contemporaries in the 50s and 60s started to do, he instead embraced the diagonal and the curve. And the curve not just in the interior of the canvas, but also in the shape of the canvas.
And so he began to make these tondos, these round paintings, and then he began to add linear elements to those paintings and finding ways to juxtapose colors which were very inventively chosen. And that series of works was known as the correspondences. So it would be the correspondence of one color to another color one shape to another shape. And the correspondence paintings pushed what was kind of compositionally possible for him in his work.
And he started playing with different panels. And the panels didn't fit together in a puzzle or in a perfect piece the way, Ellsworth Kelly's panels might have, or Frank Stella was playing with. They had all of these weird edges and spaces, and in those parts themselves became an equal component in the composition. So when you look at the constellations or the correspondences, you have not just the shape canvases, not just the imagery, the color on the shape canvases, but also the space between and around. And all of that seems to be treated in a very even-handed way. Each one of those is an element of the final composition.
The way he was able to figure out how to balance color, form, and complexity really could come to the fore in this series of works known as the Constellations. They're enormously sort of cheerful, outgoing paintings.
The work is very in tune with the desire that people might have to be more upbeat, to have some of the kind of energy of the late 60s, which is definitely, I think, abstracted, but definitely a real component of what makes these works vibrant and exciting and so vivacious.
All of it is about sort of unshackling yourself from the conventions or the traditions. So that might be the conventions and the traditions of being a gay man in a McCarthy-era New York. It might be the conventions and traditions of working in a moment when gestural abstract expressionism is dominant, and he's working in a very pared down way with very little texture. Or it could just be in terms of your psychological freedom, your ability to be comfortable in your space. So I think there are all of these layers that for him, it seems, were not so separate and disparate, and that kind of was the culmination of his work, or the hopes for his work, and which I think actually come through pretty clearly.